Live with Littledata. Today I'm joined by a guest, definitely an expert in the space, Daniel Perry-Reed from Measurelab. Welcome, Dan.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Good. Now tell us a little bit about yourself and Measurelab. What's your interest in the analytics world?
Sure, I'll keep it sweet because these can drag on a little bit. But my name's Dan. I work at a company called Measurelab. We're an analytics consultancy based in the UK, all over the UK. And my role, I'm an analytics consultant and trainer. So I've been working in the space for over 10 years now, using every iteration of Google Analytics and other tools to better marketing performance, basically, for lots of different companies. And I also run training courses in Google Analytics, Tag Manager, Looker Studio, data visualization, that kind of thing.
Awesome. And Dan's actually giving away a discount to the next training starting on the 6th of November around Google Analytics 4. So we'll share the discount code at the end of the video. But he's created some great courses. So yes, I think today what we want to chat about was Google BigQuery and specifically kind of how you use that in conjunction with Google Analytics. It's a topic we've covered before in some of the live streams, but I think it'd be really interesting just to go a bit deeper on kind of like, as you say, the kind of what is it, the why, and then a bit of the kind of how to get started. So, yeah, let's start with kind of what is BigQuery.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good place to start, right? What the hell is this thing that everyone's probably been talking about for a long time, and people might have heard this, especially in the migration to GA4 lots. So start at the very top. BigQuery is a product within something called the Google Cloud Platform, and it's a suite of tools for cloud engineering, and BigQuery is their data warehouse. So the way I like to think about it is that BigQuery is a spreadsheet or Google Sheet that lives in the cloud. You don't see it, but it exists, and it's just full of lots and lots of data. And the scale of it is the reason why we call it a database rather than keeping it into a Google Sheet or something like that.
Yeah, so what's the sort of, I guess, what, that stuff you said all goes behind the scenes of Google Analytics, right? You don't really get to see that, but it is effectively, just the what you see as the web interfaces of actually just the sort of top layer of their stack. They've got, obviously, behind the scenes, lots of data collection and processing going.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, Google Analytics is powered by BigQuery itself. So Google's been using BigQuery to power our version of Google Analytics for many, many, many years. So it's actually what they've done in the context of Google Analytics 4 specifically is they've surfaced that to us now. So anyone with a Google Analytics 4 property can actually keep a copy of their raw data, which before we weren't able to do in Universal Analytics unless we went beyond the paywall of Google Analytics 360. So it's actually the reason why there's lots of chatter around the industry about it right now is because it's gone from a very enterprise level paid for thing into a free to have essential thing. And I think what's happening is that kind of context switching of like, what the hell is this? Why is it important? Why should I be thinking about it? Why is everyone talking about it when I've never heard of this thing before? And I think that's why it's been thrusted into the limelight as such. But it's been around for a little while. And like I said, it's been powering what we use in terms of Google Analytics. Google's just enabling us to kind of keep a bit for ourselves so that we can do what we want with it.
And I get it's a really important point you say that it's sort of opened up to, because it's now a free connection, it's opened up to a much broader community. Because I really get that vibe at the moment. There's a lot more analysts and substantive work with this. Means there's lots more kind of open source, aggregations, reports, templates, etc. So I think that's kind of I always think that's a good way, get involved with any technology when there's a groundswell of popular support for it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think something that I'm really keen on and something we could talk about today, Ed, is around kind of like, I can't promise we'll do an amazing job at just demystifying that a little bit, because there's lots of very clever people, and a lot of people I work with are very clever as well, that can use it really effectively, can do some really clever stuff in it. But it doesn't have to be like a crazily complicated tool that only data engineers or the IT department can use. This is a accessible tool where anyone can actually get started and use it pretty easily. And you don't have to be the best in the world at SQL and understanding data engineering to get started. And I think what I'm really keen on is talking with you is kind of like those reasons of why should we do this? And if I'm a marketer in a brand and I have Google Analytics 4 and I know it's important, but I don't have, like, for example, a team of data engineers or scientists, then, it's still useful for you. And I think that's the real point that I want to put across, is because, and I'm sure we'll cover all these points, but there's lots of points there that it's actually really important we set this up because of a lot of other changes Google's done with the move to GA4.
Yeah. So yeah, let's get into that. So I know that what's obviously top of a lot of people's minds at the moment, having just sort of moved off to universal analytics, is the kind of, the actual how would I get my data out if I needed to? Because, obviously what people have found is actually, wow, over years, maybe sometimes 10 years, we've aggregated a lot of valuable stuff into universal analytics. We didn't really worry about it being owned by Google because we trusted that it goes free access. But actually, what we realized is actually the difference between, yes, I can technically have access to it, but the practicalities of actually being able to get it out and do something useful with it outside of Google Answer. So I guess I think a lot of marketers are thinking that way now. Like, okay, well, what's if I go in on GA4, how am I going to get out there in the future?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the irony, isn't it? It's like if they go in for GA4, they're forced into it. They have GA4. Google
Right.
auto migrated you. Solutions like Littledata can implement it pretty quickly. So I think everyone is, for better or for worse, like it or hate it, everyone's on the
Yeah.
GA4 wagon. And come the 1st of July next year, where all of your historical universal analytics data is deleted for good. I mean, it's one of those things that we've got no choice. And I suppose we go through that process of kind of accepting it, grieving it, the loss of universal. But you touched on probably the most important point around why people like me keep talking to everyone else and saying BigQuery is so important with GA4 is about ownership. And another term that's been bandied around a lot in the last sort of year or two is the idea of first-party data. And we're talking about the same thing. The BigQuery export is first-party data. And so what's really important is you own your data. As you just said around the universal analytics data, you don't own that data, Google does, right? Google allows you access into their version of the data, which is what that web interface is for Google Analytics. But it's not your data. You don't access that raw data. That data is not yours. It's your from your website and from your users, but it's not yours. You don't own it. It's technically what's called third-party data. And so Google has control over that, and they can do what they want with it, right? Because we've all read the T's and C's signing up to Google Analytics, sure. But actually going into BigQuery, what that does is that puts it into your own ownership. So you own that data, which means it's first-party data. You control it. You can do lots of clever and cool things with that, including actually having personal data in there, PII data, things like that. But the key thing is ownership and governance, because if you don't own your data, how the hell are you going to control your data, right?
Absolutely, and I think that a couple of years ago, I guess, before GA4, marketers would have, if they were concerned about that, and there were definitely bigger companies that felt like it was it was a deal breaker to use GA if they couldn't own the data, would have used a tool like Snowplow or something to get them their own stack. Now they still have a place, but I think that the great news is that you can still use all the free data collection that Google Analytics does, but now you can actually have the best of both worlds in terms of you can then own the raw level. And I think it's also, I guess when we talk about owning the data, it's important to talk about the fact that it's the kind of what we might call event level data or row level data. It's literally every granular touch point, not just kind of reports of that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what the biggest thing to learn moving into the GA4 world is that we've gone from this idea of sessions into this world of events. And so there's an event for everything. There's an event called session. There's an event called page view. There's an event called click and purchase and add to cart and all the other lovely stuff. So every every action from your users on your website and your mobile apps now is all sent through into this. And you have again, think of it as a giant spreadsheet, and each row is a different action from a user. And then you've got the user ID, the session ID, and you can do all the cool stuff there. And one of the key points actually on why we'll go into a bit more of the detail, but like why this is actually important is because we mentioned like a couple of the changes that Google's rolled into GA4. Now, Google Analytics 4, I always like to say, is not an upgrade to Universal Analytics. It's a separate product. The only thing it has in common is the fact that it's called Google Analytics. Everything else is basically throw out the old stuff, bring in the new stuff, and start again. Some of that means that things like data retention is different in Google Analytics 4 because data, even though data storage and processing is relatively cheap nowadays, Google's paying for it because you mentioned this is a free solution. Google's doing basically unlimited data collection for you for free, which is crazy. Like no other tool offers a free unlimited data collection mechanism. So the way Google does that, or the way Google minimizes its cost for your data, is to only keep your data for a certain period of time before deleting it. And so this is a really important part, is that your data, and this is actually the same but slightly different for Universal Analytics, Google doesn't keep your data forever. It has no incentive to do so. It's not important for it. So actually, if you want to keep your historical data, you have to set up and keep that data yourself using this BigQuery export. So it's one of those things nowadays, like if you wanted to get 10 years later from today and you still wanted your data from 10 years ago, i.e. today, this is the only option we have. But the irony is that because the export doesn't backdate, we have to set it up now, even if we don't have a use case for it right now. So it's basically an insurance policy. So setting up this export is an insurance policy, a kind of your future self will thank you for doing it down the line. And that's why people like me keep harking on about it, to do it now, just because it's like one of those things that's you need to have it done now to make use of it in a year, 2 years, 10 years time.
Yeah, right. So just let's recap for people what the options are in Google Analytics. So basically, there's a default collection of a couple of months, and then you can extend that by 14 months total. So if you wanted, let's say you started in Google Analytics this summer and you want to go back in a year's time, literally you wouldn't be able to sort of select beyond the 14 months to build reports.
Yeah, there's a small print there. So if you just go into your kind of summary views in the home page, right, that data is going to be there. So total users, total sessions, total revenue by day is always going to be there. But if you wanted to go drill in and create things like segments and comparisons and go into the Explore workspace and build funnels, for example, then you won't be able to. So it's one of those things like at surface level, you might not notice, but behind the scenes, as soon as you sort of go beyond the surface level, you're going to realize there's nothing there. And this is where it's going to catch people out.
And in a way, that's more dangerous, though, because I mean, as you say, you might at a surface level, you might just go back on that user's overview and just go back and say, "Oh, yeah, I've collected it all for years now." Okay, yeah. I mean, I think this is really important people understand that, because it's, as you say, it wasn't there in the previous version. I totally understand why Google would not want to just process for free. As you say, you just even doing it for a year is pretty it's pretty large amount of the data centers. But yeah, so. If you truly want to be able to go and explore and drill into your data after more than 14 months, well, if you want to do it more than 2 months, you need to go and change the settings right now in the admin. But if you want to do it more than 14 months, BigQuery is your only option.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so that's the kind of ownership and governance side, the first party data, the data retention, all these kind of words we're banding around, we're talking about the same thing. Keep the data, own it yourself, keep it for as long as you want to keep it for, because Google's not going to do that for you, unfortunately. The other side of that, though, is that that's almost like an administrative reason to set up this BigQuery export of like retention and ownership and all that other stuff. I think the other side of it is going to be the more exciting side, which is the activation side. So I'm very always kind of like wanting to talk about all the fun, exciting stuff you can do if you have a team of people that can work with this data and kind of push it over here, create segments, go retarget audiences based on inputs from multi different sources. We can do that for sure. But I think when we talk about activation, I'm really talking about 3 main things, which is reporting, modeling, and joining. So the first one, activating data in reports. I mean, I don't know if anyone watching or yourself, Ed, if you've used Google Analytics 4's native connector to things like Looker Studio or Tableau. And we sometimes, very often sometimes, hit things like quota issues, like limitations based on using the API with Google Analytics. We actually only have a certain allowance we can use per request per hour per day, and actually that can get used pretty quickly, and then it just breaks all of the dashboards. So running your reports via BigQuery, you don't have that. There's also an added perk of it actually going a lot faster. So sometimes those reports can take a little while to generate if you're using GA4 natively, whereas again, you take all of the kind of onus off of Google Analytics 4 and you're plugging it directly into a database that's pretty well optimized to generate reports off the back of.
Yeah, right. And I think that last point is what I hear a lot of people complaining about. It's like, okay, maybe some big brands want like real time, like, to the 10-minute start reporting. But the big use case is just, I just want a daily dashboard of what happened yesterday. And the problem is, generally with GA4, you couldn't even do that because the data latency is kind of more than 8 hours, which means that 8 a.m. you wouldn't necessarily have collected all of the data up to midnight before. So I think that's one of the simple challenges that the BigQuery can solve right now. Is actually, the data latency in BigQuery is no more than a few minutes. So, you're gonna certainly, if you want to do like day-on-day reporting, it's going to be 100% accurate.
Yeah, there's like a second thing for this, which is really interesting. Well, not a lot of people realize is that in the interface, Google is actually updating its records for 10 days. It says 9 days, but just assume 10 days. So if I look at yesterday's data and then do that same date the next day and the following day, that number is going to change. And by number, I mean every single number in Google Analytics has the potential to change. Using BigQuery, once it's in, it's done, it's never going to change. And the reason why it changes in the interface is because of what Google's applying on top of the raw data. And this is basically, we call it data modeling, but it's basically doing lots of calculations and processes on top of the raw underlying data to embellish it with all sorts of different things. But the thing is that a lot of these, and to use another buzz term, are machine learning models. Now, these machine learning models have to learn over time, and sometimes that changes. And so Google has got in its documentations that data can change up to 9 days after it comes into Google Analytics 4, which obviously if you're doing daily or even weekly reporting doesn't really bode too well if you need numbers to be exact and frequent and ready the next working day, right? So again, using the BigQuery data, you have confidence that data's there, it's not going to change, which is cool.
Yeah, that is cool. And as you say, I mean, I guess most people are familiar with the feeling that Google Analytics are directionally correct. Like it's not a, it's not actually a snapshot of actually how many people use your website. There's lots of legalities to how it might track that. But if it measures 100 users a day and 120 users tomorrow, you'd be pretty sure that's a sort of roughly a 20% increase. But as you say, it's a real problem in some companies, I guess, if particularly people, share the finance team or something, that it erodes credibility if the number you showed them yesterday is not the same number that you see in the same report next week.
Yeah. Well, the modeling is also like the reason why the modeling is really important. Now, this is obviously if you have the time, the skills, the people maybe in the team to do this kind of stuff. But if you did have those people, one of the real bonuses of using the BigQuery data is to apply your own modeling on top of the data. So Google's doing all of its own modeling on your data and surfacing you the results. You can do the same thing with the raw data. You can apply your own models in it and surface those results. But the reason why it can be very beneficial for doing it yourself is because you can remove any biases that Google might implement, because let's not forget, Google's the biggest advertising company in the world, and it's got a bias there for you to spend money in its marketing channels, right? Because Google Analytics is free. How are they monetizing you? It's going to be through things like Google Ads and the marketing platform. But also things like a lot of the models they've got are really focused on the predictive analytics are really focused on things like e-commerce, and you have to be a certain scale of volume and be tracking things like revenue and add to basket clicks for that to work. Now, if you don't have that much volume, if you're not in the e-com world, then how are you going to make use of this? And actually, you can actually do your own modeling. You can do your own predictive models. You can do kind of what you want. It is a bit of a blank page in terms of what you're able to do, but it just means that you can make some of the GA4 specifics that are targeted towards things like e-commerce and large enterprises. You can actually make a bit more specific to your business and organization's needs.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I've been going about the last few months is the dead certainty that kind of the ability of sort of AI to query structured data sets is just increasing all the time. So, while ChatGPT's got all the buzz the last 6 months about being able to just, query natural language, like actually, I think the ability to, if you actually wanted a tool to be able to say, hey, what was my top performing landing page, last month and why, it can do that much more easily from that raw data if you give it the raw data set. It's quite hard. I mean, there are tools that plug in on top of Google Analytics itself and do that through multiple API queries, but I think it's much easier for algorithms to work with that sort of big table underneath.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if anyone is kind of in that world of wanting to explore things like generative AI and some of the stuff to plug into data, exactly as you said, Ed, there's something within the Google world called Vertex AI. Now, this is something that they're unifying all their kind of generative AI across all of their ecosystem of tools under this idea of Vertex AI. Now, that name can change because Google is known to do that kind of stuff, but it's really interesting where they're going to do things like, and I suppose we'll touch on it in a bit, but things like BigQuery, we have to use SQL. SQL is a coding language for processing data. Now, generative AI can help write that code, and I've actually got a couple of resources I can ping over in the chat or afterwards to share with everyone in terms of how do you actually use SQL if you're not sort of an expert or trained on it. And actually there's lots of entry points. You don't have to sit and do Udemy courses to figure it all out. There's actually ways in which can be a little bit more palatable, like generative AI, like some other resources that I can share.
Right. And again, AI is actually brilliant at doing that sort of stuff. Again, creating a structured search based off a natural language query. So, I've already seen demos of this. You can quite easily say to ChatGPT or some other chatbot, like, right, here's my data set. Build me a SQL query to get the top most popular 20 products selling over the last 20 days. Bang, it outputs the code. So yeah, as you say, that stuff's only getting better by the day. Cool. So we covered a couple of points of why. So basically, let's recap. So data retention, basically infinite data retention, ability to run your own models and query that with any other sort of wise?
Well, the only other one I can think of, or at least one of the key ones, is going to be joining to other data sets. So Google Analytics is great if you just have a website or app and you do no offline marketing and nothing comes through the call center, nothing comes through in a point of sale device, and everything's kept within a digital ecosystem. So if everything lives on a website or app, then Google Analytics is fine. You don't need to do anything else. However, that's not often the case for multiple businesses or any business really. So joining your data is a key one. So again, I think in terms of spreadsheets, I can't help it. That's how I was kind of brought up in this world. And so for me, it's like doing a VLOOKUP, right? Can you do a VLOOKUP to another spreadsheet or another tab with other data sets? So could I do a join or a VLOOKUP to my CRM data if I'm B2B doing lead gen on my website? And actually, can I track that through things like HubSpot or Salesforce all the way through to a conversion? Or if I generate leads by phone calls or generating them to call us or us to give them a call back, can I actually get that call data back in to Google Analytics or blend it with the data? And I think this is the next natural step of kind of unifying all of your marketing data into a single perspective. I don't want to say single table because it's never as neat as that in reality. But it is actually saying, can I get all of my marketing ecosystem together, and can I then start analyzing it as a one whole, I suppose, omni-channel lump? And the kind of clever stuff you can do with that, which I think the only real way of doing that is going to be exporting that data via BigQuery. And you actually can do the same with Search Console, with Google Ads, with Facebook, with LinkedIn, and all your other platforms. So you can do all of that, bring it all together into this kind of cloud ecosystem, and then you can start, again, in my simple brain, VLOOKUPs, joins, and that kind of stuff with it all.
Absolutely. And one of the simple use cases I see a lot is just the ability to build an audience based off your kind of basically online behavior and link that with actually your own customer list so that you can actually target real users. So obviously in Google Ads 4, you can build an audience that you would use to target people in Google Ads. That's fine based off the cookie identifiers. I think that's an anonymous audience. But what's quite easy to do in BigQuery, relatively, I guess all it takes a bit of SQL, but you can have all that stuff, basically what the customer did, and some of those events will be in e-commerce. Certainly, will be linked to an identifiable user, like they checked out, they went, and if they're using Littledata, that means those events will have a customer ID with them, and that customer ID you can then join in a long list of your users to the actual user's email, and then you can basically say, right, I want to email all the people that browse for this product that didn't buy it, or I want to email all the people that purchased twice last month. Do you see what I mean? Like there's very simple use case there where you can bring the best of the kind of anonymous data that you're capturing in Google Analytics with your actual customer table, your CRM data, and then create what I would call an identified audience, an email list.
Yeah, and there's one last thing to add into that, if I may, Ed, and that's a consented identified audience, right? And so one thing we can't avoid talking about now in the world of MarTech is the fact that we are dependent on local legislation, browser technologies, and all sorts of other random stuff that is probably, we can go down rabbit holes on any individual one of those. But one of the key things is that we're using a lot. So Google Analytics is based on the idea of a cookie. And so when we talk about users in Google Analytics, we're talking about cookies. Now, cookies are pretty fragile. This is first-party cookies, not the third-party cookies that are being phased out next year, by the way. So there's nothing, don't worry, nothing's going to change with that. But actually, if they don't consent for that cookie, what happens? And the third kind of bonus point, I suppose, in terms of why BigQuery is actually a really good asset to have is because the way that it works is if there's no consent provided for analytics cookies on your website or app, that data is not surfaced in Google Analytics 4. You can't see that. So technically, every GA4 property nowadays is a partial data set at best, because depending on your opt-in rate on our website, there's about a 40% opt-in rate, which is quite low for the industry. But we only see 40% of our data inside of the Google Analytics 4 reporting interface. Now, in BigQuery, you get all of the data, consented or not. And it sounds a bit weird to say that, but we don't have any user identifiers. We have no way of stitching that data together, stitching it back to the user. They're called cookieless pings. And we have lots of these floating events, these actions like page views, purchases, scrolls, clicks, add to baskets, and things like that exist within our data set now. But you actually can't see them in the interface in GA4, but you can see them in the BigQuery export for GA4. And so if you wanted to get total page views, total purchases, total, add to baskets, you can. And the only way to do that is actually using the BigQuery export now. So it's a little bonus thing, and a lot of people don't realize that that's happening, that actually not all their data is being surfaced in GA4, but unfortunately that is the way of the world. And actually this is very akin to something called server logs that used to be the main point of analytics back in the day. It's just about getting totals. You're not going to be able to do any user attribution or user journeys or funnels, but it is just totals, which is better than not having totals, right?
Yeah, and as you say, in fact, you can get sort of high level funnels in the sense that, if you just want to know on average, what truly how many people who view a page go on to add to cart or whatever, that's is possible. So you're right. It's a sort of the most complete view of your online experience you'll get within the confines of privacy constraints.
Yeah, exactly. That's the key thing, is just if you need total page views, the only way to do that is with BigQuery. So it's one of those. I'm sorry, but this is the way. This isn't a Google thing, by the way. This is an industry legislative technological sort of constraints on it. But Google does provide access to the data. You just have to go this way rather than that way to go get that data.
Okay, we've sort of covered a lot about why. Let's spend the last 5 minutes talking about the kind of how to get started practically. We banged on a lot about you need this. So what would be your recommendations?
For sure, yeah, I spend a lot of time talking about how it's important, but then we always end up with only 5 minutes to talk about how to get started. So yeah, thanks Ed. But so yeah, the key thing is you don't have to be an engineer. You don't even have to know SQL to get started with this. Like I said before, the most important thing is that you have your GA4 BigQuery export turned on, because your future self or team or person or successor in your role will need it, and they will thank you for it, even if you're not around to be thanked. So the key thing is that just think of it, like I said, the best way to think about it is a giant spreadsheet that you have access to. Now, you don't have to go into the very technical interface to query it using SQL. You can actually natively plug your BigQuery export directly into a Google Sheet. So there's a native connection between Google Sheets and BigQuery. So if you don't want to have to learn the Google Cloud Platform and BigQuery, you can actually just completely browse your data in a Google Sheet, which is where I'm more happy, right? So for me, I can just plug it into Google Sheets. It's called Connected Sheets, and it's a feature where you can just browse your data in Sheets without having to log into BigQuery, which is really cool. The kind of parallel, but maybe one step up from that, is you can natively plug your BigQuery data into Looker Studio. So if you wanted to visualize your data without having to do anything fancy, you can literally turn on the BigQuery export. You can go into Looker Studio, plug it in, and start visualizing the data pretty quickly. Because it's a Google product, or they're all Google products, they are very compatible, and there's loads of templates even that you can just copy and start, not from a blank piece of paper. So already there, you can start using the data without even having to know how to use the data. You can just plug it into the tools that you're familiar with, like Sheets and Looker Studio. But beyond that, you can kind of go and log into the SQL interface, or the interface where you can generate some SQL to then query that. And there are resources galore online in terms of copy and paste bits of code to get you started, because the best way to learn is by doing. And rather than staring at a blank page with a flashing symbol ready for you to input some code, actually it's really useful to go somewhere, follow guides. YouTube is your friend. Googling this thing is your friend. I mean, any Google product is one of the most well-adopted tools in the industry, regardless of what they try to do. So there's loads of resources from, like yourselves at Littledata, like us at Measurelab, and loads of other people. So yeah, there's so many resources on how to get started with that. It wouldn't hurt if you wanted to do a SQL course on things like Udemy or something like that, then feel free to do that. But again, it's about access, and you don't need to use that data. You can absolutely get value from this without ever logging into the GCP. Now, the one thing that I suppose the small print or the asterisk next to that that I just said is that you do need to have an account in the Google Cloud Platform, and you do need to link a credit card to it, because underlining all this is that it's not free, because again, storage costs money, and that's why Google doesn't do it, right? So you have to pay for it yourself. There's a free tier. We work with lots of brands that are very well known and have lots of web traffic, and they pay almost nothing every single month for their data storage. There is also a free version of BigQuery that only keeps a rolling 90 days worth of data. Is a good place to start. So if you didn't want to link a credit card, if you didn't want that, you can actually get started pretty quickly and try before you buy. Now, the purpose of what I've been saying is to set it up to keep that historical data. But if you're really cautious and you want to go figure it out first before you invest the money, you can always use that the free version, which keeps the last 90 days of data.
Yeah, cool. Let me just set through that for people. So just say, we've got a guide about it on the, in fact, I'll pin the link as well. Awesome. So basically, as you say, the hardest bit is actually that first bit of actually like setting up the BigQuery on Google Cloud and entering the billing account. Once you've done that, it really is pretty easy. There's there's now this different settings page in Google Analytics. They rolled this out, so sorry if you're not used to this one. But then the links are just down here. They have product links, BigQuery links. This one's already set up, but basically just go in, you plug in your project ID in BigQuery, and you decide which data streams and a few different things. Generally, you want to have daily and streaming. And you can also now export user data, which again, I think why not, given, as you say, the cost of storing out so low. And then, as you say, without scaring people off, you would basically see something like this. This is the sort of BigQuery actual table that's stored and all different event names, and you could just basically go in and start building a query. So I'm not going to try and do that live. My SQL is certainly not good enough. But as you say, at that point it gets a bit scary. But I think the point of like just getting it in here, really not that hard at all. As you say, Google makes it extremely simple to add those links, and it really takes minutes.
Yeah. Exactly, and thanks for showing us that. I think that it's not actually scary once you get started and start knowing your way around it. But like anything, another tool to learn is another tool to learn, right? And although you would have to go through that process, and I'm sure you guys will share the link on how to do that, set it up and walk away is my recommendation. Set it up and walk away, and then if you fancy it, join it to Looker Studio, join it to Google Sheets, and start investigating, start playing with the data. Maybe do a Google search, follow a YouTube tutorial on how to get a simple report built or something like that. And that's all something that can happen in your own time, your self-paced learning. You can do that as and when you like, or maybe you've got someone else to join the team, or someone else that can pick that up. But like I said before, none of this can happen unless that button is turned on. And this is a key thing, is that it doesn't backdate your data. So it only works. So as I was showing, if you set up that connector to BigQuery, only starts from the next day, and you have yesterday's data, and we won't go back in time. So it doesn't matter how much data you've got in GA4 right now, it's kind of nothing until you set that BigQuery data up, because then you get to keep it for yourself and get to do all the cool stuff that we've been talking about.
Right. So let's go back to one of the simple use cases we've been talking about. It like you want to just basically have a Looker Studio dashboard that basically breaks down, particular user journey month on month for more than 14 months. That's all great. You can do that, but as you say, only from only for the months you've been set up BigQuery. So as I said, I think, as you say, set up now and figure out how to use it later.
Exactly, and that's why people like me and Ed are always harking on about BigQuery and Google Analytics 4, and this is the kind of reasons why we think it's important. And yeah, the one piece of advice right now is just set it up, walk away, and come back to it when we want to. We've got all the time in the world to figure out how to use it, but we need it there to begin with.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we should end here just by saying I'm very excited about this, because I think, as you said at the beginning, like it opens up a whole realm of stuff that was only available on the paid 360 plans before for Google Analytics, and it really does, in my view, negate a lot of the kind of major concerns that brands would have about sort of getting in bed with Google. As you say, the fact that it's not sort of their own data, the fact that you can't sort of add it's not truly a data warehouse. You can't add on, BigQuery is a true data warehouse. And also the fact that, I guess still some concerns. People like, is Google Analytics really impartial? Because you say they have a bit of an axe to grind, don't they? But I do truly think that with the actual data collection and therefore what gets seen in BigQuery, they're not adulterating that. It is actually just as it is. So you can think of it as just piggybacking on the free infrastructure Google's used for their own, ad reporting, to use for your own purposes.
Yeah, exactly. And the final thing around, like, if you aren't in the Google Cloud Platform ecosystem yet, if you haven't ventured into that world of things, it's something that I think is going to give it a couple of years, is going to be so commonplace that everyone will have some kind of infrastructure set up. Because if you want your Search Console, your SEO data, your ads data, your analytics data, but also things like the world is moving towards server-side sort of tracking implementation. So we've all heard the term CAPI thrown around. What CAPI means is the conversion API for Facebook, but that is a server-side conversion tracker for Facebook ads. Now, the only way to do that is if you have your own server, and your own server is the Google Cloud Platform. So actually, we unpick a lot of the terms that have been thrown around a lot, like things like CAPI and enhanced conversions on the Google side. What we are talking about is you setting up a server and sending the data directly to these platforms. And the way you do that is the Google Cloud Platform, and that's just an extension of BigQuery and these tools there. So what we're talking about is not about setting up a whole new ecosystem of tools that only you're going to use for Google Analytics. Actually, most organizations are kind of venturing into that world, if not already have some kind of ecosystem, and actually sort of breaking into that is going to become so commonplace now that I wouldn't worry too much around kind of like, oh, it sounds big, complicated and expensive. It really isn't, and it's so commonplace now.
Well, let's be honest, it's the genius of Google's business model here is that they're using all of their extensive marketing tools to drive the use of Google Cloud, which obviously they want to get as many companies as possible using the Google Cloud Platform. So it is, I think, a very clever strategy. And again, like there's no sort of dubious reason why Google's giving all of the way for very cheaply. It is genuinely to drive that adoption.
Well, yeah, they're a business too, right, Ed? There's loads of other stuff. Like we talked about the GA4 data here, but the same as we could have had the same equal conversation about Search Console or Google Ads. Those data exports are available too to BigQuery. So already that's 3 Google products. There's also ways of getting your additional data sets in there pretty easily. So this is not a GA thing. This is a data thing. GA is one of a few data sources. So if you're interested in this, you're keen, then I would highly recommend going into that with Search Console and Google Ads at very least, and then exploring out from there.
Awesome. Well, I think we should wrap up now, but let's go back to your course that you've got. So you've kindly done a discount code for anyone to use for the upcoming course on 6th November, Littledata 20 NOV. Please, if you want to use that on Dan's website, in fact, I will just plug in the link as well into the comments. If it's fine, there's already a link there. Jazz has posted, great. So yeah, just go and click on the link in the comments. Thanks very much for coming on, Dan, and yeah, really interesting to hear your perspective. I do share a lot of your enthusiasm for this. So I hope maybe in 6 months' time we both come back and share a bit what we found customers doing with BigQuery.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Ed. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. I always like talking about this kind of stuff. And if anyone watching wants to reach out to me, you can find me on LinkedIn and all the usual places to ask questions and to pick my brain. Happy to do so. Just let me know.
Great. Thanks for coming. See you all soon.